All right, so today we're going to talk about paragraph, but before we get into the lecture, I just wanted to give everybody a chance to ask questions if they had any questions about the previous lectures. No, Shannon, Shannon that has no questions. So everybody, if you have questions, email Shannon because clearly she knows everything and can answer everything.
Thank you.
Shannon, do you happen to know where I left my keys? Because that would be a good question too. No, I'm joking. So no questions, anyone? No?
No.
Ah. Okay, so then let's get going with discussion of the paragraph. And you will remember from last week's discussion that we talked about the structure of the paragraph, which you see there, sort of a summary of what we said. And I kept saying, and of course, in other cultures it's different. There's other ways of doing this, etc. And so I said I'm going to deal with it in a different lecture at a different time, right? Well, so now is that time that I'm going to sort of pay up on this debt that I have with you. So first of all. Well, and going back to the basic structure, so you have the thesis and then the evidence for your thesis, as many sentences as you need, obviously up to a limit. If you have 15 sentences, you should probably split it. But that's too much. And then, we said it can be complicated by transitions, which we discussed last week, where you say, all right, I've done X, now I'm going to do Y. But then you can also have other things, right? So you can have, for example, parallelisms, right? So you can have a paragraph that says, just like the Roman Empire took hundreds of years to fall apart, the European Union will take, decades to fall apart, right? So then you have evidence of the Roman Empire falling apart, and then you would have evidence of the European Union falling apart, right? So my point is, regardless of what you think about the Roman Empire and the European Union, which we don't care, is it would be organized as two subsets of evidence, right? Because you're within a parallelism structure, right? Same thing if you do a compare and contrast, right? If you say there are differences and similarities between the Roman Empire and the European Union, first you're going to look at the differences, then you're going to look at the similarities, right? So then your evidence becomes organized based on these rhetorical structures, okay? But again, that's to be expected. Now, there's a few things that we need to talk about that's sort of very practical before we jump into the sort of the meat of this week's lecture. So first of all, and this is really, there is no linguistic reason for this, it's more like a usage thing. You can think of it as an etiquette rule or a politeness rule, something like that. There's no reason why you should put your fork and the spoon on one side of the plate the knife and the spoon on one side of the plate and the fork on the other, right? There's no reason. You just do it that way because, well, that's the way we do it in our culture. Well, so here is a rule like this. You should not have a single sentence paragraph or a two-sentence paragraph, okay? Why? Well, because if you only have one sentence, you only have a thesis, right? There is no evidence provided, right? And so that's frowned upon, okay? And if you have only one sentence providing evidence, that's not enough, okay? So again, there is no like strong reason, right? Because I mean, sentences are, after all, more or less arbitrary units, in terms of thoughts and in terms of ideas. So it doesn't really matter, but style, etiquette, whatever you want to call it, usage is the technical term, wants that you never have a one-sentence paragraph or a two-sentence paragraph, okay? So if you find yourself with that, add another sentence, okay? Or combine two paragraphs into one, okay? That it's always possible to do that. Also, if your transitions should never be by themselves, right? So you should always have your transition either attached at the end of the previous paragraph or attached at the beginning of the following paragraph, okay? They just cannot be on their own. Also, there are some differences in formatting that you need to look at. APA format. It may be different from what you were used to. So, for example, in some styles you tab at the beginning of a new paragraph. In other styles you don't. So that's and the number of spaces that you tab. In some styles you put a new line at the end of the paragraph. In others you don't. So again, you need to sort of see what it is. Now the numbering of headings is tricky because some styles, again, some journals will say, we want you to number the headings, and here's how you do it. And other journals and other styles will say, don't number the headings ever, right? I personally like numbered headings because it helps me keep track of where I am. But again, as I said, it's not a requirement. It's just, in some cases, a personal choice. But mostly, you need to look at what journal are you dealing with, right? What's the standard in the field, and pick that. Okay. And if in doubt, just go look at the APA samples, and you will be good. But again, keep in mind that there's a lot of variation there. Okay. All right. So. Again, I said this last week, I assume you can write a sentence. If that is not the case, we need to talk. But so let's make that assumption, okay? So once we make that assumption, you've got a bunch of sentences put together, and we want to consider the paragraph as a unit. Now, there's two ways of looking at it. From a formal standpoint, which is what it looks like, and from a content, which is what's in the paragraph, is what it is that you're saying. And both are important. That is, you need to take care of both. You cannot just say, oh, I'm just focusing on content, so I don't care what it looks like. Remember the whole idea of signposting? The structure of the paragraph signposts, this is a paragraph. This is a conceptual unit that is there, okay? And then, as I said, the problem with the non-native speakers that we're gonna address in a minute. All right, okay, so here's an example of the signposting that I was talking about. So you have here, it's sort of an exaggerated indentation, but because it's like, I think, 10 spaces, that's a bit much. Usually it's 5 or something like that. But the indentation tells you visually, this is the beginning of the paragraph, okay? And the line break at the end also helps you see visually where the paragraph ends, okay? And again, why would I bother signaling this fact, okay? Well, it's because the paragraph is a unit of content, okay? That is what you're doing when you write a paragraph. You're saying, this is a set of thoughts that fits together into a block of meaning, a block of content that is all related, okay? And so you want to tell your audience, this is where this block begins and ends, okay? Because if I'm reading along, I want to make sure that I say, okay, what did the author say in this paragraph? What was the point? What was the thesis of this paragraph? And maybe you're going to highlight it or something along those lines. Okay, so that's what it looks like in writing. Now, interestingly enough, this is what a paragraph looks like in speech, okay? Because paragraphs are not just there in writing, they also exist in speech. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at that because that's not the focus of this course. Could you go next door and tell them if they can keep it down? Thank you. But so the idea there is that you have tone units, okay, and these are called paratones, in which the beginning and the end of the paragraph are signaled by a reset at the end of the paragraph. So you basically your tone goes down from left to right as the time goes by and you're talking, and then you take a deep breath and you start again from a high pitch and it starts going down. Okay, and so that's what a spoken paragraph sounds like. Okay, so my point here is that paragraphs are signaled both in writing but also in speech. Okay, because they're very important units of content. Okay, that is, you're saying, here's a set of thoughts that fits together. Okay, and that fits together is really sort of the important part of the story. All right, so the literature, the research on paragraph organization exists in sort of a strange little subfield of applied linguistics called contrastive rhetoric, and then it's gotten other terminology as well, but that's the starting term. And as you can see, it starts out by an article by Robert Kaplan that he published in 1966, so quite a while ago, in which he looked at a set of different languages, and he considered how they may influence the organization of the paragraph. Okay, and this article became incredibly famous, and basically any book that deals with paragraph organization and whatever will have this chart, which I'm going to show you in a second, in which he has these little doodles, as he called them, little designs, little graphs, that indicate the way paragraphs are organized in these families of languages, right? So here's the doodle diagram. And so you can see that according to Kaplan, English is a straight line, okay? Then the Semitic languages, and that includes Hebrew and Arabic and those languages, are organized by parallelism, okay? So the idea is you develop ideas in parallel, and the dotted part is when you skip, okay? That's not explicitly presented. Think of the Bible, and you probably have heard of biblical parallelism, so that's what he's talking about. So then you have this category of Oriental languages, which of course, needless to say, people have criticized horribly because it lumps together Chinese, Japanese, Korean, languages that are completely not connected, right? So it's like a very iffy claim, but whatever, as they say. And so the idea here is that it's a spiraling organization of the thoughts. Is you don't go directly to the point. You sort of orbit around it without ever actually really getting to the point. But the idea being that your audience is supposed to guess what your point is. Okay, and if you think, well, that's crazy, no, it's not actually. Okay, because we do this as well in situations in which there is a very high level of disparity in terms of power, and so if somebody is very powerful and somebody powerless, the powerless person cannot just come out and ask the powerful person to do something, right? So what you do is you circle around it, right? And so so for example, imagine a child talking to his parents and saying, Mom and Dad, you always say that I should be playing more outside, and that a boy of my age needs more exercise, and little Billy down the road, his parents got him a dog, and he's always running around in the park, having fun with the dog, and he's lost weight and he's looking good, So at this point, you should have guessed, right? What's the child trying to get? Get me a dog, right? And so, but without ever saying it, right? So that's the idea here, is that you're circling around the topic without coming out and say, hey, mom and dad, can I have a dog? Okay, so that's the idea. Now, the Romance languages, that's French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, those. Did I say Spanish? Yeah. So those languages, right, that come from Latin original. So here, the idea is that the organization of the paragraph sort of zigzags without any rhyme or reason. So first you talk about one thing, then suddenly you're talking about something else, then you're talking about something else, and then ta-da, at the end, you've reached a conclusion that was completely unpredictable from the origin that you started from. Okay. Now again, you may say, what's he talking about that? Well, actually, he's got a point in the sense that, and I'm a native speaker of two Romance languages, so I know whereof I speak, as they say. In Italian and in French, if you just come out and blurt out what your point is, people are going to say, oh, okay, so you think that the European Union is going to fall apart over an extended period of time like the Roman Empire. Yawn, who cares, right? Now, on the other hand, if you say the Roman Empire fell apart, the European Union is in crisis, the Emperor Justinian did this, and as in physics we have chaos theory. Ta-da! I'm putting everything together. The European Union will fall apart because we're in a period of chaos, as Justinian had foreseen. Oh, how clever. Okay, that is, in Europe, that counts as, wow, scared of you. You put all of these ideas together and you were juggling all of them at the same time, and we had really no inkling that that's where you were going, but in the end, you pulled out a rabbit out of the hat and all the ideas fit together. Good for you. That's a clever argument. Okay, I mean, and that's really the way it is. I mean, I know because people have said that my writing was dull because I just got to the point and told them, this is what the theory does. And they're like, well, that's dull. That's not interesting. I'm like, well, I didn't know I was supposed to be here to entertain you, right? But that's the way they perceive it, right? So it's part of your job as a writer to be interesting. Okay, and a straight line is not interesting by definition. It's like, you just got there. Now the Russian one, the idea being that you just like zigzag without ever actually saying it, and so suddenly you're supposed to guess how you got there. Okay, I don't speak any Russian, so I can't tell you if that is an accurate description or not. If there's anybody in the class that speaks Russian, and I think actually there is a student who does, I would love to hear your thoughts about that. Now, before you even say anything, and of course, in the 50 so years that have passed between 53 years that have passed between the publication of this article and today, it has been a sort of a national sport among applied linguists to take shots at Kaplan for being racist, for being insensitive to cultural difference, for ignoring. I mean, everybody sort of enjoys criticizing it and saying, what a stupid thing, etc., in which it is guilty of all these things. Yes, it is completely biased and all of that. However, the basic idea that there are differences in the way the paragraph is organized across cultures remains true. Okay? And in fact, I am going to show you what I mean by this by talking to you about the dissertation that a student of mine did a few years ago at this point. I never knew how to pronounce her name, so I'm not even going to try, but she went by Teresa, much to my relief. If anybody knows how to pronounce it, please send me an email with an audio file. Okay, I'm kidding. But anyway, so in 2014, she wrote this dissertation in which she did a hell of a job, as the expression goes, because she was like super conscientious worker. She took 120 academic articles, 60 in American English, 60 in Taiwanese Chinese, in similar disciplines and in the same time frame. And then she extracted 5 paragraphs from the articles for a total of 600 paragraphs. Okay, we're talking like a huge sample. Okay, and then she analyzed what was the position of the thesis statement in these articles. Okay, so this is as hardcore empirical research as you can have it. Okay, and the conclusion that she reached is that there were significant differences between the way English locates in academic English, right? Where English locates the thesis and where Chinese locates the thesis. So in English, overwhelmingly, the vast majority of paragraphs placed the thesis in the first sentence. That's the location that you expect. And so that's where they placed it. However, in Chinese, hello, Julia, can you? We can't hear you. Can you hear me? Sorry, we're having a little. Okay, well, okay, so in Chinese, on the other hand, what you have is, yes, in many cases, the thesis shows up in the first sentence, but you also have a lot of cases in which it's the last sentence of the paragraph. Okay? And then there are some that occur in second, third, and even fourth position. So in other words, the conclusion there, and here's a chart that shows the same data, right? So you can see that for English, 90-some%, 95% of the paragraphs have a thesis in the first sentence. Whereas for Chinese, as you can see, it's not it's slightly above, slightly more than half. Okay, and maybe a third of them have a thesis in the last sentence. Okay. So in other words, there is enormously more variation. Oh, there you have the exact numbers in case you were interested. So 97% of English paragraph have the thesis in the first sentence, okay? Whereas only 56% of Chinese do. Only 1% of English paragraph have the thesis in the last sentence, whereas almost 25% of Chinese paragraphs, a quarter, have the thesis in the last sentence, okay? So there's definitely a lot more variation in Chinese than there is in English, okay? And these, again, are unquestionable data, okay? That is, methodologically, this study is the cleanest thing you will ever get, okay? And it is a massive study, so statistically speaking, these data are rock solid, okay? And they show very clearly that in Chinese, placement of the thesis statement is much, much freer than it is in English, okay? Now, this has important consequences from the standpoint of teaching how to write a paragraph, not just to non-native speakers, although obviously for non-native speakers that's obvious, right? But also for the native speakers, okay? And let me explain why. Because what it means is that there is no natural, clear organization of the information, okay? That is, the English organization is just as arbitrary as the Chinese organization, or the Italian organization, or the Swedish organization, okay? So in other words, there is no language of logic that tells you how to organize the information. The way you organize the information in language is arbitrary. Okay, just like the word for dog is arbitrary because it's chien in French and it's perro in Spanish, and there is no reason why it should be perro or chien or dog, right? Or cane canem in Latin, right? So there is no reason for that. Just likewise, there is no reason, independent of culture, for the thesis to be in the first sentence, in the second, or the last. Okay? Which means that when you tell people, well, just organize your sentences clearly, you're not giving them any information. Because clear means in the way that your culture expects. Right? So in this particular case, because we're writing in English, it means in the way that American academic audiences expect you to organize your paragraph, which means with the thesis in the first sentence. But if you were writing for a journal, a Chinese journal, then it could be something different. Like, for example, at the end, or if you were doing this in French or in Italian, your thesis would be at the end because it's called the conclusion. All right? So again, the consequences are significant, not just for the non-native speakers. For the non-native speakers, obviously, they're super important because you have to learn to operate in the other language, okay? But for the native speakers, it's also important because you realize that you cannot just say to a student, well, do it logically, okay? Hi, Julia, now we can hear you.
Yes, yes, I was having some difficulties.
All right, good. Well, you can watch the rest of the lecture then in the recording, okay. So you don't have to worry. See, that's another advantage of this system. Okay, so then for the native speakers, right? You need to also tell them, how to organize the information, because logic and common sense aren't gonna tell you. Just like logic and common sense isn't gonna tell you what to call a certain object that happens to be a dog. It's only the convention of English that tells you, call that a dog. Okay, so this is very important. Now, let me tell you a little personal anecdote before we wrap this up. When I came to this country, I was a graduate student, like you are, and my first semester, they said, here, write a paper about X. I don't remember what the class was. So I, went and wrote a paper and turned it in, and the professor gave it back to me and said, Sal, I gave you an A because you used a lot of very difficult words, and clearly you know what you're talking about, but I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about in this paper. It's just like beyond me. I don't get it. So I was like, wow. Okay, that's not good, right? But I mean, okay, I said, well, maybe it's just like this professor, it's like, I don't know, it's a loser professor who doesn't understand the brilliance of my writing. So then the second paper that I write, same thing. Professor says, Sal, we are very impressed. We've never seen a paper so full of polysyllabic words that we had to go look up in the dictionary, we have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Could be about the topic that you say in the title, could be about something else. We got nothing, but we gave you an A. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. You know, I'm thinking like, well, maybe the whole faculty is full of loser professors who don't understand anything. Well, so then the third paper that I wrote was for my mentor, the guy who'd invited me to come and study with him, and I, really respected his opinion and so on. So I do an especially good job. I turn in the paper, and he says, Sal, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Right. So I'm like, crap, this is not good, because now I can no longer say, well, it's just the loser professors who don't understand me. Now, because this guy was my intellectual hero, right? So I'm like, all right, okay, there's a problem here. Now, at the time, I was, I think, engaged or dating my first wife, who was a native speaker, an American native speaker of English. And, when you're sort of beginning a relationship, you can ask them to read your paper. After you've been married a few years, don't even think about it. But when you're dating early on, it's okay. They still like you, basically, right? Okay, so I say, well, here's my paper. Could you please read it and tell me, when you stop understanding what I'm talking about? So very helpfully, she starts reading in the first paragraph. She says, okay, so, I read your first paragraph, and I think here that what you're saying is blah. And I say, no, I'm not. That's not my point at all. And she says, well, no, you said that, this is what you're saying. I'm like, no, that's just, I'm just throwing a few ideas out there, but you got to read till the end in order to find out what I said. She goes, oh, no, that's your main point here, right here. And I said, okay, so do the second paragraph, same thing. She says, well, I say, what's my main point here? And she points at the first sentence, right? So I said, well, I'm not going to tell you what I said because it was very vulgar. But I went back and, I took all the last sentences of my paragraphs and I put them at the beginning. Okay? I turned the paper back to my mentor and he said, brilliant, you've learned how to write clearly. And this is not a made-up story. It's entirely true. And since then, everybody has complimented me on the clarity of my writing and so on and so forth. Okay? Because I learned, well, in Italian, we call them conclusions for a reason. We put it at the end. In English, it's called a thesis statement, and it's put at the beginning. Now, what kind of people puts their conclusion at the beginning of the text when you haven't presented the evidence yet? I don't know, and I'm not going to judge. I'm not judging. This is me not judging, right? Crazy people, if you ask me. Okay, fine, but I'm not judging. I'm not judging. In English, you put the conclusion at the beginning. Okay, fine. It's arbitrary, right? Once you learn the rule, just do it, right? I mean, you may think it's crazy. You may think it sounds much better if you put it somewhere else. Sure, don't do it. Do what the culture wants you to do. Okay? Because again, the slide here, I can highlight it. They will think that you're not clear if you don't follow the convention that they're expecting. Okay? And if there's nothing else that you learn from this lecture, memorize that sentence. Okay? And as I said, this is super important for the native speakers as well. Okay? Because when you're writing, you forget about this. Okay? And I can stop sharing because now we can go back to, all right? So, all right. So, when you are, writing a paper, right, and you want people to understand you, you have to meet the demands or the expectations of the audience that's going to read your paper, right? I mean, because they're not going to say, oh, what he or she really was trying to say is X. They're going to say, well, what I'm getting out of this is this. Not only that, if you are familiar with the concept of linguistic penalty that Pickering talks about in her classes often, basically it's the idea that if you are following like a different convention, right? You're not following the convention that people expect. They get annoyed at you, and even very slightly. We're not talking like beat you on the head with a stick. They're just slightly annoyed, and if you build enough of this slight annoyance, after a while they get really annoyed, and then they will stop listening to you. They'll stop reading you if it is in writing. Okay, so in other words, you can sort of cut yourself off from your audience by not placing the information where your audience expects it. Okay, now, and you might say, okay, but wait a second, we're native speakers, right? So those of you who are native speakers, right? You may say, well, we're native speakers, right? We don't need to worry about this because it comes intuitively to us, right? How many of you were thinking that? Anyone? Yes? No? Yeah? No? All right. Nobody's too chicken to raise it there, because you know it's a trick question, right?
No.
You're smart enough to figure out that I was waiting to pounce and say, ah, ha, ha. Years and years ago, my colleague Steve Brown and I did a study, and again, it was a massive study in which we were looking at paragraph organization. And again, it was a very, very well organized, very controlled, all the variables, etc. But basically, we had a paragraph, right? I mean, there were several paragraphs, but you would look at one paragraph, and in some cases, the thesis was at the beginning, some cases it was at the end, some cases it was in the middle, right? And we asked the students to rank the paragraphs for goodness, how good of a paragraph it was. So what would you guess was the result? Did the students prefer the thesis at the beginning, the thesis in the middle, or the thesis at the end?
Thesis at the beginning.
I'm sorry?
Beginning.
Beginning. All right. Anybody else?
At the end?
At the end? Anybody wants to take the middle? Come on. I'll take the middle. I'll say middle, because the result was exactly split evenly. A third, a third, a third, which means that the native speaker have no intuition whatsoever about the organization of a paragraph. Okay, that is, we could have put rabbits and they would have picked as effectively as the students. Okay, now these were undergraduates, to be fair. Okay, and you know, you might argue that there is no difference, intellectually speaking, between wild rabbits and undergraduates. That you said that, I didn't say it. Okay, but nonetheless, my guess is that if we did the same study with graduate students, the differences wouldn't be that significant. Okay, but my point is, as native speakers, you have no advantage. Okay, so you can wipe out that smug smile on your native speaker face. I've been wanting to say that for a long time. As native speakers, you don't have any advantage. Now, if you're good at paragraph organization, it's because you've learned it from reading, from being in school, from having teachers like me that said, that's wrong, you need to do it this way, okay? But as native speakers, you have no special intuition about paragraph organization, okay? And that's why it's crucial to provide this information, to impart this information, even for native speakers, because otherwise, if you just say, well, write clearly, organize it in the obvious way, the native speaker is going to say, it doesn't come obvious to me at all, it's not clear to me at all, because they don't have that kind of intuition to begin with. All right? Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the lecture that that I had for today. Any questions before I talk a little bit about the assignment?
I have one question.
Yes.
So the claim is.
Can you, oh wait, I'm supposed to do this. Hang on, I'm selecting you.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So my question was, if thesis writing or paragraph writing is culturally determined, what you're suggesting isn't that a culture is composed of native speakers, but rather a group of native speakers who have agreed that this is the way it should be referred.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically the idea is that, it's the same thing as a language, right? A language is just a group of people that have agreed at some point to speak the same language. And because of they follow the same conventions, then we say that they speak the same language. The moment that they start speaking, the conventions split, we say that they don't speak the same language anymore. The two languages have diverged. Okay, so it's the same thing. I mean, basically, what I'm saying is that paragraph organization is just as arbitrary as any other part of the language. Okay? Any other questions? Julia?
I say no.
No? Teresa?
Here we go. No, I'm good. Thanks.
Good. Shannon? Okay, good. Very good. All right, okay. So then let me very, very quickly talk about the assignment. So the assignment is basically practicing to write a paragraph using very deliberately using the technique that I just said. So it's 5 boxes. In the first box, you write the thesis, which is your main point, right? It's the most general statement that you're going to make about whatever it is. I suggest that you pick the topic of your paper, but it doesn't have to be. It could be, the Super Bowl sucked because point 1. I don't know. Why did this? Anybody watch the Super Bowl? I was told it was terrible. Anybody? No? Nothing. All right, sorry. I would draw that example because no one has any evidence for it.
It was the lowest.
Say again?
It was the lowest scoring Super Bowl in history.
Excellent. It was the lowest score. Okay, so Super Bowl sucked because point 1, it was the lowest scoring thing. Point 2, the midterm show wasn't that interesting. I'm sorry. Was it?
It's normally called halftime.
Oh, halftime. Okay. Nah, midterm, halftime. Same difference. What, are we going to be picky here? All right. Okay, so the halftime show was boring. And the teams that played in it. Okay, so what about the teams? Okay, so apparently the teams were not popular. All right. So there you go, right? So thesis at the top, and then evidence 1, 2, 3, 4 below. Okay, and it's in boxes because I want you to really practice doing this. Main point that I'm making: evidence, evidence, evidence. Okay, I don't want transitions. I don't want fancy stuff. I just want to practice putting it into a box. Okay. Any questions about the assignment? Yes, David.
Yes.
Nope,
So
sorry.
just to make sure, it doesn't have to be relevant to our research.
I suggest that it is because why not, right? Practice working on your subject. But if you prefer not to, that's fine. I mean, I'm not. Basically, what I'm saying is I'm not wed to the fact that it has to be on your subject. If you'd rather not, that's fine. Just don't steal my Super Bowl analogy. Let's be clear.
That's too bad. All right, sorry.
Yes, Teresa.
Yeah, and then if we do choose to do this, is this, if we use our research topic to do this, is this like an introductory paragraph, like our general thesis for
Yes.
the paper, and then it would be preceded by supposedly the arguments you're going to make through your paper would be points 1 through 4?
Yeah,
or,
it will be followed, yes.
okay, and then your subsequent paragraphs would then come back and revisit those
Correct.
4 sentences.
Then
Okay.
your subsequent paragraphs would take each of the pieces of evidence, and that would become the main thesis of that paragraph.
Okay, that was my assumption. I just want to make sure
Yes,
we're on the same
good,
page.
good. Yes, no, you were exactly on the right track. Julia, yes.
So so on the assignment, do you want us to, we can just use the box format, but we're gonna put it in just into a paragraph, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's you know, if you want to, you can literally print out the boxes and write in them, you know, by hand if you want to. But you can also just yeah, like
Okay, just do your
Shannon is actually
paragraph.
holding up the, I don't know if you can see the in the
No,
little,
I didn't see it.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to, you can actually write in the boxes, right? But if you just want to do it as one big sentence at the top, and then, you know, 4 bullets underneath, or you know, a numbered list underneath, that's fine. The format I'm not hung up on, but I do want it to be a thesis and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of evidence.
Now on the thesis is our main idea, but we're also supposed to problematize it, correct?
It doesn't have to be your main idea. You can pick an idea of those that are going to be in the paper, or you can do something else. I'm not. It's just a practice, right? So you can do whatever you want.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Shannon, hang on. Let me select you. I need to practice this selecting thing.
We don't need to write the paragraph yet. We just need to write our kind of this kind of outline.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yes.
And if we choose to write it on our actual thesis that we're working on,
Yep.
that runs on the assumption that we have looked through other material and other articles, gathered the information.
Well, yes, but I mean, as I said, if you know, if you use the material that you've seen so far, that's fine. I mean, I'm not okay. I'm not going to hold you to the thesis, and you know, if you say, but in my final paper, I want to say something different. I say, no, because you said that in the little exercise that we did on week 4. No,
So you're not,
this is just a practice. You know, that's why I'm saying, you want to write about you know, something else, feel free. I don't care. The important point here is that practicing writing a structurally sound paragraph according to the rules that I just gave you.
Okay, so you're not going to hold us to this
No,
particular.
no, I'm not. Good.
Okay, because I have about 20 articles that range in length from 18 pages to 300
Yeah,
pages.
no, and you're not supposed to have read them all by now. Yes.
I haven't. Okay.
Good. All right. Any other questions? All right. Okay. Then I'm I'll let you go. Thank you for attending. This was a fun lecture, and I'll see you next week.